We meet in the space between parts. It is a space of inertia, where we suspend all limiting ideas of human potential in an authentic effort to move from darkness to light by discovering the true nature of reality.
Welcome back to part 11 of the Absolute Reason Mentorship Program with a focus on gender ideology. Today, we will be further exploring the two aspects that is within the individual. This we will be doing by applying the practical application of sacred physics and everything else that we have discovered and learned in the previous parts. We will do this practical overlay back onto Chloe Cole's interview with Jordan Peterson, but specifically where she points out what the initial feelings, experiences, and triggers were for her to pursue a transformation of her physical gender expression. But we will also return to Abigail Schreier, where she had that lecture for Hillsdale College. And it was in that lecture where Abigail went into discussing the book she wrote with the name of Irreversible Damage. At the end of that book, however, she places a couple of conclusions and a few questions, as well as she kind of implies another further action or two that should be taken by us as society. So we will be venturing into all of that today, but with the added knowledge of spiritual science. And by the end of it, you can decide for yourself if sacred physics truly has an illuminating force that comes with its application. What I mean by the illuminating force, it means that you take this knowledge, you overlay it onto any type of topic or discussion or concept in your life. If you do that, the illuminating force of spiritual science reveals a deeper meaning and a deeper truth as to who you are, as well as a much brighter and a clearer eye on the true nature of reality. This is exactly what we will be discovering today. I am Joan, your freaky philosopher. And you are my absolute reason. But let us quickly do a recap as to what we explored and discovered in part 10 before we head on to part 11. And we will obviously do this by returning to the lecture of Rudolf Steiner, titled Man and Woman in Light of Spiritual Science. Rudolf Steiner, open quote, "Through his masculine nature, the inner femininity of the man appears, and through the woman's feminine nature, her inner masculinity appears." Close quote. Rudolf Steiner, open quote, "For that which meets us in the two phenomena of human nature can best be clarified by consciously striving for this higher harmony. In this way, the question of the sexes will be deepened, and the polarities will be harmonized. Everything in the nature of the sexes attains a very different form and meaning. We cannot solve this question through dogma. Rather, we must seek a common ground and find perceptions and feelings that lead beyond the sexes." In a nutshell, what Steiner is pointing to is that when you look at the scale of man, there is always two aspects present. And as I have been teaching since day one, first was energy, then matter. Steiner steps in with exactly the same observation, but he uses different terms. He says there is life and form. First was life, and life brings that formless into form. This life aspect within the individual is expressed as the feminine aspect. The form aspect of the individual is expressed as the masculine aspect. To harmonize these two dual aspects of who we are as individuals is the critical step for humanity's spiritual evolution. But harmonizing does not mean equilibrium. Equilibrium is a complete balance of these two dual aspects. No, harmonizing is an understanding that there is a push and a pull between these two aspects of who you are as an individual. For instance, when I do art, carving, wood carving, I take that little feather on the scale of man and I move it from the world of energy into the world of matter. I do this because my focus, my center core, needs to be led at that very point of carving the wood by the world of matter. And that is then the harmonizing of my two aspects, and not the exclusion of one or the other, or the complete equilibrium of both. The time has finally arrived for us to feel and experience the illuminating force of spiritual science. We will be experiencing this illuminating force through the observations of Chloe Cole during her discussion with Jordan Peterson. And then we will end this part 11, off with Abigail Schreier's observations. As a guiding principle, let us remember this quote of Rudolf Steiner, open quote, "It is not the senses that deceive, it is judgment," close quote. One of the first things Chloe Cole points to is that growing up, she was a tomboy, and she fit in more with the boys. I could immediately relate to Chloe's experience, as this was exactly the experience of my own childhood. Although I would dare to say that because of my conduct disorder, that I was more than likely 10 times worse than Chloe Cole. I loved climbing trees, playing full-blown contact rugby with my cousins. I wanted to dig holes, grab the guns, point and shoot, and you would never find me in anything that resembled a dress. And so it was there where I could completely relate to Chloe Cole. What I pointed out, however, was her saying or referring to the word play, the scenario of playing. Now, playfulness is a critical aspect in exploring one's own true potential. And this is exactly what was happening there. Chloe Cole was playing with boys, getting really in touch with her masculine aspects. And then somewhere along the line, a perverted adult came in and planted seeds that were based on half and quarter truths. And these seeds perverted that initial spiritual evolutionary push that Chloe naturally felt in the beginning. And that push was for her to strive to gain a deeper understanding of both her feminine and her masculine aspects. But you see what happens when adults, especially confused adults, begin to interfere with our children. We must stand guard against quarter and half truths, perverting spiritual evolution. The second point Chloe Cole points to is that she went through puberty at age 9, and she describes it as being really difficult. I placed the observation in question around our ability to adapt to perpetual change. The ability for an individual to adapt to perpetual change in the early stages of life is completely dependent on their spiritual development. Offer your child a religion from which they can then further explore themselves. All religions speak spiritual science. You can choose anyone that works for you and that fits your culture. But teach that to your child and you will see how their spirit carries them at the early stages of life through perpetual change. Chloe proceeds to point that she felt distressed when she could no longer physically compete with the boys. And my question around this revolved around self-empowerment, because it's clear Chloe felt disempowered once physically she could no longer compete. But if someone had to point to Chloe Cole that there is a feminine strength that is part of who she is, even though it is hidden in the more subtle aspects of her, then just perhaps Chloe would not have felt distressed, but rather a sense of curiosity as to what this feminine force is that she now gets to explore in the same way she explored her physical force with the boys. Chloe proceeds, and we are back at puberty, where she felt negative emotions go up, like depression and anxiousness. Again, I pointed to an inability to adapt. Adapting to circumstance and the perpetual change of life, as I previously mentioned, is incredibly assisted through a religion, something that stirs the spirit within, something that nurtures it. Another way of doing it, and just to supplement it, is through basic practices of will and focus. I am not going to go into those daily practices right now, and in fact not at all throughout this 12-part series of gender ideology, but I will soon enough be doing an additional segment around spiritual practices that you can do, especially when you feel like you are depressed and you feel anxious. These physical practical application practices will also help you through those very anxious and volatile moments. Chloe proceeds to point to an increased self-consciousness on her physical appearance. But do you notice that she only points to her physical appearance? Imagine if her parents were equipped with the spiritual science that is sacred physics. And if they were equipped with this 12-part series, then at that very moment where Chloe is pointing to her self-consciousness around her physical appearance, her parents could pull this out from their back pocket and say, how's about we explore our spiritual experience and appearance first. And once we have explored this spiritual aspect of who we are, then we can go back to our physical appearance and see how we relate to our bodies then. But they couldn't do it. They didn't have this knowledge. And so they went to the clever intellectuals in white coats who will do nothing but pervert truth. Chloe also points to an intense feeling of loneliness. And as an individual who can completely relate to this type of intense feeling, because let's just be honest, I'm weird as shit, and I do things very different to those around me, which means in general, I wasn't the popular girl in school. I wasn't bullied either, because who would dare? But I definitely wasn't the popular girl in school because I'm a little weird. I'm the freaky philosopher for a reason. But what has definitely helped me all my life, because I've done this in stages and in different ways through an intuitive impulse, all my life, the ability to fall still and to become aware of my feet on the ground and the air on my skin and the breath moving in and out of my body. That type of meditation is a beautiful way of reminding the individual that in truth we are never alone. Life, God, Spirit, and all of what we have been and ever will be intersect into this moment when we begin to connect with this moment. When you connect with your feet on the ground and the air over your skin and the breath moving in and out of your being, you begin to touch your spiritual aspect. And your spiritual aspect is vast. It is all pervading. And I promise you, it is never alone, but always one. On Chloe goes to say my body wasn't what I expected, which pointed to a need to force and control outcome. But what would have happened if at that very moment her parents could introduce to Chloe the scale of man? And what if then she used the scale of man to better explore and understand the physical expression that is her body? I hope that that quick run through Chloe Cole's observations with the overlay of spiritual science has at least given you an idea as to just how potent the illuminating force of spiritual science is. And it is with that that we are now entering the closing part of part 11, and we will be revisiting Abigail Schreier's observations and conclusions. Abigail Schreier, in her lecture on her book Irreversible Damage at Hillsdale College, ends the lecture with a summary and a conclusion, but most beautifully with some questions. And that question is, what do we do about this? How do we push back on the onslaught of gender ideology? Abigail offers us the direction that we must first oppose the indoctrination of our children in gender ideology. Second, in public we must speak up, and we must speak the truth. Always, wherever we find ourselves, at work, whatever we do, we must refuse to recite the lies. We must overcome our squeamishness. If conservatives are to confront these issues, we must be educated in the topic. And she ends off by saying, we must clearly distinguish, for instance, between transgender Americans, many of whom are wonderful, and an ideological movement which seeks to warp our children and wreck our families. This is a movement that will turn our children against themselves, because its advocates know there is no greater horror to a parent. There is no quicker way to bring America, I would say the world, to its knees than by prompting our children to do irreversible damage to themselves. Now, these are beautiful observations, conclusions, and also good direction. But I want to take it one step further from Abigail's direction and see how our spiritual science can now assist us not just to know what to do next, but to see the next 1, 2, 3 steps maybe. And from then we can evolve further. So to start with the first observation, she notes that first we must oppose the indoctrination of children in gender ideology. But how does one do that when I see stone-cold, worn and beaten, mature anchors, presenters, like stumble all over themselves when they start debating the topic of gender ideology? Well, it is because we only have one eye on the world of matter, and nobody is bringing in the energetic aspect of the scale of man. And it is the very nature of the world of matter to consistently divide itself into more complex parts. And that is why you will always walk into a wall if you do not include the entire scale of man, energy and matter, with a conversation or a debate around gender ideology. But then I do dare to ask Abigail, when you say we must speak up and we must speak truth, I do wonder whose truth you are referring to. What truth? If you were to come to me at the age of 16 and 17 and refer to truth as Christianity alone, I would have blocked you out. I would not have wanted to listen to you, especially Christianity presented to the individual as it currently is. Present Christianity, however, in the same way that Rudolf Steiner did. Well, then you would have had my attention and my full compliance with whatever Rudolf Steiner quality teachings would have directed me to do. But tell me I have a demon and a devil inside of me, and I'm going to send you off on your merry way, and I won't listen to a word you say. We do not want this. We don't want to reject these individuals and only manage to reach the few who are Christians. Not everybody is a Christian. So when you say truth, is it the Christian truth you are referring to? Or the scientific truth, which is exactly the type of perverted and confused quarter and half truth that led to this very point? So we must implement the full scale of man, which we can overlay onto any religion. I promise you it works. Go and test it. You will find it. Christianity, Jewish religion. Oh man, I don't even know all the religions. Just go look. It is there. I promise you. So overlay the scale of man. And then you begin to have your eye on the absolute truth. With that absolute truth, well, yes, then I'm totally with you, Abigail. We must speak up, but we must also speak with one voice. That one voice can only be reached through spiritual science and the scale of man. As for us having to overcome our squeamishness, I'm totally on board with this, Abigail, totally. And that is exactly why I have been so blunt in referring to the surgical procedure that is related to gender ideology as our children cutting their tits off. You may think, oh, that's a bit crude and you shouldn't, can't you say it in a nicer way? No. You must wake up and understand that that is exactly the outcome of what will happen. Your child will cut her tits off. Catch a wake up and let us all begin to pull together so that we can begin to speak with one voice. It is through the pursuit of spiritual science knowledge. This 12-part series will do the job. Don't watch it once, don't watch it twice, but at the very least, watch it 3 times. That sets a rhythm. 1, 2, 3, tick, tick, tock. That sets a rhythm, and you can begin to pursue spiritual science. As you as an individual will to raise yourself by yourself, your discretion is developed. And that is exactly what Abigail ends off with. That we need to be able to discern between the true transgender individuals. Those are the 1 in 10,000s. We need to be able to discern between them. The children, or the especially the daughters, the girls, who are now attached to the social contagion of gender ideology, and we need to be able to discern who are the activists in and around these 2 groups, and who are they and how can we identify them effectively without isolating the 1 in 10,000 and the social contagion individuals. We need to be able to identify those who pervert truth. And when we identify them, well, then you have to hang in there for part 12, because in part 12 I will be addressing the activists around gender ideology. These are the people who will go and get aggressive within the marches and who knows, wherever they find themselves. They're always throwing eggs and all sorts of name calling. By the way, you can call me any name you want. It doesn't bother me at all. But in general, I am known as Joan, your freaky philosopher. And you are my absolute reason. Stay tuned for part 12. It's the last part. And like I say, I will be addressing the last type of individual addressed by Abigail Schreier, the activist.